My name is Sienna Ward, and when this whole ordeal kicked off, I was 33 and running on empty. That bone-deep exhaustion that settles into your very joints. By day, I was at the helm of a custom motorcycle fabrication business in Portland. I wasn't the one answering phones or managing the administrative side of things. I was the proprietor and the lead fabricator. I was the one shaping metal, assembling frames, coaxing life into engines, and I spent a significant portion of my existence enveloped in the scent of gasoline and industrial cleaners. That particular Tuesday had been an absolute grind. 2 of my key crew members were out with illness, which meant my morning was consumed with crafting a fuel tank for a rush project. The afternoon was dedicated to battling a recalcitrant exhaust system, and the final 3 hours were spent in a protracted argument with a vendor who suddenly couldn't locate an order we'd placed 2 weeks prior. By the time I pulled into our driveway at precisely 7:30 in the evening, I was running on fumes. My hands throbbed. My lower back felt like it was screaming, and a distinct line from my bandana was still imprinted on my forehead. All I craved was to heat up some leftovers, endure a scalding hot shower, and then drift off midway through a true crime documentary. Instead, the moment I pushed open the front door, an unsettling quiet descended. The house was far too still. Ethan's vehicle was parked in the driveway, confirming his presence. Yet there was no ambient music, no television soundtrack, not even a podcast emanating from the kitchen speaker. Just an oppressive, heavy silence. "Ethan," I called out, dropping my keys into the ceramic bowl by the entrance. "In the kitchen," he responded. I walked into the room and came to an abrupt halt. He was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, his posture suggesting he'd meticulously arranged himself there. He'd clearly showered recently, styled his hair, and donned a crisp button-down shirt with jeans, attire I knew he'd selected with deliberate intent. His entire demeanor radiated a sense of occasion, not casual relaxation at home. A subtle knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach. "Hey," I said, making a conscious effort to keep my tone light. "You're looking rather dressed up for a Tuesday." He offered no smile. "We need to talk." Naturally, we did. I reached for a bottle of water in the refrigerator, unscrewed the cap, and took a long, deliberate sip, buying myself a precious few seconds. My mind was already racing through potential scenarios. Was it undisclosed debt, job insecurity, a surprise excursion, a premature midlife crisis at the age of 32? "All right," I conceded, placing the bottle back on the counter and leaning against the opposite one. "What's going on?" He inhaled deeply as if reciting a prepared statement. "You know, this life," he began, gesturing vaguely around the kitchen, "isn't quite working for me anymore." I blinked. "What life?" "This one," he clarified. "The routine, the conventional path. I'm starting to feel like our relationship has become stagnant. I'm bored, Sienna." He paused, then continued. "I've been doing a significant amount of reading, a great deal of introspection, and I've come to realize that monogamy is, in essence, a social construct." There it was, the pronouncement I hadn't anticipated. I simply stared at him, the words registering with a strange, unhurried impact. Perhaps it was the sheer exhaustion, but for a fleeting moment they sounded like a joke delivered in a language I only partially comprehended. "Could you repeat that?" I inquired. He appeared almost irritated that I wasn't immediately nodding in enlightened accord. "I'm presenting you with 2 options," he stated. "I want to be truthful with you, not engage in clandestine activities. So, I'm being upfront. I wish to explore something with Sasha." The name struck me with the force of a physical blow. Sasha, his ex-girlfriend from university. The one whose name used to sporadically appear on his phone notifications years ago, until he'd finally severed ties for the sake of our relationship. The one he'd described as intensely intelligent and vibrant, but ultimately too volatile for a lasting connection. "My ex," he added, as if I might have forgotten. "You know her?" "Yes, Ethan," I replied, my voice deliberately measured. "I am acquainted with Sasha." He tightened his grip on his arms. "So these are your choices. You can accept my desire to explore this connection with her, and we can collaboratively determine how to navigate this in a mindful and ethical manner. Alternatively, you can step aside and allow me to proceed, because I'm no longer willing to confine myself within the confines of this established framework. It took every ounce of my self-control to refrain from bursting into laughter. I had just endured 12 grueling hours on my feet, covered in grease, wrestling with stripped bolts and back-ordered components, only to return home and be informed that my relationship was a box because he desired to rekindle a romance with his former girlfriend. "How long have you been contemplating this?" I asked. He sighed, as if I were deliberately complicating a simple matter. "This isn't some impulsive decision, Sienna. It's a process, all right? I've been expanding my awareness for months, delving into literature on non-monogamy, listening to experts, and conversing with individuals who have embraced this lifestyle." "That's not a direct answer," I stated softly. "How long have you and Sasha been communicating?" His jaw visibly tightened. "Several months. It's primarily been on a spiritual and emotional level. She understands certain aspects of me that you simply don't." There it was again, that undercurrent of smug, understated cruelty cloaked in the jargon of self-improvement. "And you're presenting this as what, exactly?" I inquired. "An opportunity for my own personal growth." "Precisely," he confirmed, his eyes brightening with what appeared to be self-satisfaction. "I'm not betraying you. I'm exercising transparency. I have no desire for secrecy. I want you to have the chance to evolve alongside me, to transcend feelings of jealousy and possessiveness." I observed him for a prolonged moment. On the surface, he appeared serene and contemplative, much like a podcast guest eloquently detailing a spiritual awakening. Beneath that veneer, however, I perceived something else entirely, a man who had already made his decision and sought my complicity to absolve himself of any perceived villainy. I drew a breath. "So, to summarize," I stated, "you intend to pursue a romantic connection with your ex-girlfriend, and if I decline, you'll proceed regardless. But if I agree," he continued, "then I have the privilege of being perceived as evolved and conscious while witnessing this unfold." He hesitated, then nodded. "It doesn't have to be a painful experience, Sienna. People our age are redefining the nature of relationships. Monogamy isn't an inherent biological drive. It's a societal conditioning we've internalized. There was a time, not long ago, when I would have engaged in a heated debate, raised my voice, perhaps thrown something, and bombarded him with every conceivable why and how, all while grappling with the agonizing feeling of my own insignificance clawing at my chest. However, something within me shifted, not with hurt, but with a profound sense of detachment. A switch flipped from emotional turmoil to icy resolution. My thoughts drifted to my workshop, to the years of diligent saving that had culminated in its establishment. I recalled how I had consistently borne the lion's share of our financial obligations, supporting him through his series of career shifts and his eventual foray into vaguely defined coaching ventures. I had been the anchor, providing stability while he explored his pursuits, and now he was presenting me with a stark ultimatum: passively observe his infidelity or vacate his path. A smile touched my lips, but it was devoid of joy. It was the kind of smile one offers when finally grasping the intricate design of a trap they'd unknowingly entered. "Okay," I murmured softly. "I hear you." A wave of relief visibly washed over his face. He clearly interpreted my response as acquiescence. "I'm not saying I'm entirely comfortable with it," I clarified, "but I am processing this. It's a significant amount to absorb." He took a step closer, his expression softening into that patronizing tenderness he likely employed with his coaching clients. "Thank you for being so open-minded about this. It means a great deal that you're even willing to consider it." "Of course," I replied. "You've invested considerable effort in your personal development. I wouldn't want to impede that progress." He failed to detect the subtle barb in my tone, or perhaps he deliberately chose to ignore it. That evening, he retired to our bedroom as if everything were perfectly normal, having forwarded me a couple of links to podcasts discussing open relationships and the reclamation of sexual autonomy. I watched him from the doorway as he scrolled through his phone, a faint smile gracing his lips at something I couldn't see. I opted to sleep in the spare room, feigning an acute backache from the day's work. In the darkness, my gaze fixed on the ceiling. My agitated thoughts gradually subsided, replaced by a methodical process of reevaluation. He believed I was presented with two choices: compliance or capitulation, applaud his self-discovery or step out of his way. However, a third alternative had emerged. I could maintain a facade of calm, allowing him to believe I was actively processing the situation. Meanwhile, I could meticulously ascertain the true depth of his involvement with Sasha and the ultimate cost he would incur. Around midnight, I quietly slipped out of bed, crept down the hallway, and retrieved our shared tablet from the living room shelf. We had acquired it 3 years prior, configured it with a family account, and he had never bothered to alter any of the default settings. I settled at the kitchen table, the screen's glow casting a pale blue luminescence upon my hands. "Let's see precisely what you've been expanding, Ethan," I whispered. My initial investigation began with the calendar application. That's where the meticulously organized entries, color-coded and spanning back months, revealed themselves. Wednesday, 7 until 9:02 p.m. Personal Development, Pearl District Loft. Sasha. My heart rate slowed rather than accelerated. Screenshot. Another Wednesday. The same time, the same location. Screenshot. A veritable column of them, week after week, categorized with the sterile precision of a self-help seminar. I took another sip of water, my hand remarkably steady, and then opened his messages. "Okay," I murmured. "Let's uncover who you truly are when you believe you're unobserved." The first thing I accessed was his calendar. If you've never experienced the heartache of a color-coded application, consider yourself fortunate. Neat blue blocks were meticulously arranged every Wednesday for the preceding 3 months, 7 until 9 p.m., designated as personal development at the Pearl District Loft. Not a workshop, not networking, not book club. Just that vaguely self-important phrase, personal development. Each entry, week after week, my thumb hovered precariously over the screen. I forced myself to inhale slowly, counting each breath in and out, mirroring the technique I employ to prevent stripping a bolt out of sheer frustration. Screenshot, the next entry, screenshot, scroll, scroll, screenshot. By the time I concluded, I possessed a concise gallery of betrayal. "All right," I mused. "Calendar confirmed." I navigated back and opened his messages. He had contact named her Muse. Predictable, of course. The thread extended back 4 months. Initially, the content appeared innocuous. Links to articles, podcast episodes, event invitations, brief notes along the lines of, "You'd really appreciate this one." Nothing that my former, less suspicious self would have flagged as problematic. Then, subtly, like a bicycle shifting gears, the tone began to shift. "I can't stop thinking about our conversation last night." "Me neither. You're so much more enlightened than you used to be." "I feel like I can finally be completely honest with you." Then, "Sienna is a good person, but she's complacent, comfortable, and comfort is the enemy of growth." I reread that last sentence 3 times. It wasn't enough for him to simply betray me. He needed a philosophical justification for his actions, a manifesto that elevated his infidelity into a visionary pursuit. I continued scrolling. They had exchanged selfies taken in the very same loft I had identified in the calendar entries. These images were also tagged on Sasha's Instagram account: exposed brick, Edison bulbs, plants hanging from the ceiling, creating an atmosphere reminiscent of a jungle-themed film set. She would be depicted sitting cross-legged on a floor cushion, engrossed in a journal. He, in turn, would be holding a mug, angled to showcase the tattoos on his forearms, and a small triangular shelf displaying an array of crystals in the background. "Every time you depart, I feel myself reverting to an earlier version of myself," she had written. "You don't have to," he had replied. "We are co-authoring a new narrative together, one that disregards external dictates and adheres solely to our own principles." I could almost hear his voice resonating as I read those words. My chest felt constricted, yet my hands remained remarkably steady. Screenshot. Another. I did not rush the process. I approached it with the same methodical diligence I applied to any tedious task at the shop. Tedious, yes, but ultimately essential for ensuring the engine eventually roared to life. The text messages were distressing enough. The next folder, however, proved to be considerably worse. Voice memos. Tiny waveforms stretched across the screen, each time-stamped and labeled with phrases such as processing after tonight and integration. Some originated from Sasha, others from Ethan. I tapped on one, sent approximately 2 weeks prior. His voice, low and intimate, filled the silent kitchen and resonated in my ears. "I told Sienna today that I'm not happy," he confessed. "I softened it, but it's the truth. I haven't been genuinely happy for years. I've merely been going through the motions. You understand, she's stable, reliable, but there's a lack of depth, of intellectual stimulation. Reconnecting with you has reawakened something profound within me. I deserve more than mere predictability. I deserve passion, a sense of purpose. You perceive facets of my being that she has never even attempted to comprehend." My fingers tightened their grip on the tablet so forcefully that my knuckles began to ache. Not happy for years. We'd been married for 4 years, implying that, in his estimation, his dissatisfaction had begun around the same time we exchanged vows. I swallowed hard and tapped another memo. This one was from Sasha. "It's daunting," she murmured softly. "Letting go of a former existence, even when it feels suffocating. But your desire for something more is valid. You are brave. Most individuals remain in a state of perpetual slumber. Sienna will either ascend to meet your evolving consciousness, or she will not. That is her individual journey, not yours." My journey, it seemed, was to financially support their mutual self-actualization. I backed out of the folder before the urge to hurl the device against the wall became overwhelming. At the top of the list, a single additional notification remained, a new memo I hadn't previously encountered, sent by Toby, Ethan's younger brother. I hesitated. Toby and I had never cultivated a close rapport. He drifted in and out of various employment opportunities, always embarking on new ventures, yet invariably landing on his feet thanks to intermittent financial assistance from his parents whenever he faltered. He had always been polite to me, but maintained a distinct distance, as if merely tolerating his brother's spouse. The memo title was simply, "Bro." I tapped it. Toby's voice emerged, casual and laced with amusement. "So, does she know?" he inquired midway through the recording, accompanied by the rustling sound of Ethan's movements and the distinct click of a closing door. "Now what?" Ethan's voice followed. "That I've been seeing Sasha as well," Toby replied, his tone suggesting he was commenting on the weather. My heart actually faltered for a beat. The silence on the recording felt palpable, even upon playback. "What are you talking about?" Ethan's voice was laced with disbelief. "Relax," Toby chuckled. "You're the one who doesn't believe in ownership, that if a connection is authentic, there's an abundance of love to be shared." I thought that implied. There was a scraping sound, indicative of someone pacing. "You're sleeping with her?" Ethan snapped. "For about 3 weeks now," Toby responded nonchalantly. "I assumed you were aware, man." "She mentioned you two had discussed sharing, about moving beyond exclusivity. I figured this was all part of the enlightened package." Another prolonged, awkward silence ensued, followed by Ethan's voice, now considerably lower and strained. "Right. Yeah, No, I was just processing. You're not upset, are you? No. Ethan lied unconvincingly. Of course not. This is precisely what I desired, isn't it? No possessiveness, no jealousy. Toby let out a laugh. Exactly. We're practically family. We can support each other's personal evolution. The memo concluded. I stared blankly at the tablet, the kitchen suddenly feeling oppressively small. So, this was the reality concealed beneath all the talk of sacred connection. Not some enlightened collective, but merely a man employing spiritual rhetoric to legitimize his dalliance with his ex-girlfriend, with his brother casually following suit, deeming the concept of ownership too rudimentary for his purportedly elevated consciousness. My hands began to tremble then, not with fear, but with a nascent, chilling resolve. I gently placed the tablet down on the table and sat there for a moment, absorbing the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint, distant murmur of traffic. This was the juncture in a narrative where the protagonist typically succumbed to emotional breakdown, weeping uncontrollably, hurling objects, and making frantic 3 o'clock in the morning calls to the unfaithful partner, screaming accusations. I did none of those things. Instead, I reached for my phone, activated the camera function, and began meticulously documenting everything. Screenshots of the calendar entries, screenshots of the text conversations. I downloaded the voice memos and promptly emailed them to myself, anticipating the possibility of him suddenly discovering a newfound respect for privacy and attempting to erase the tablet's contents. I created a new folder on my laptop, giving it a nondescript designation like Tax Docs 2023, and transferred all the gathered evidence into it. Then, I retrieved a notebook from a kitchen drawer, the very one I typically used for jotting down parts lists and order numbers, and inscribed the current date at the apex of a fresh page. Evidence log, I wrote. Ethan, Sasha, infidelity. I meticulously documented every piece of incriminating information I had unearthed thus far. Dates, times, locations, pivotal quotes. I approached it with the same systematic rigor I applied to a comprehensive diagnostic report for a malfunctioning engine. If there's one indelible lesson learned from operating a fabrication shop, it's the paramount importance of meticulous record-keeping. Human beings are prone to deception. Paper, however, remains steadfast. By the time I closed the notebook, my eyes were gritty with fatigue, but my mind felt sharper, more focused than it had in weeks. He believed I was confined to two choices: placate him or step aside. He was entirely unaware that I was meticulously constructing a third path. I secured the notebook within the metal cash box I kept in my truck. Subsequently, I washed my face, retreated to the spare bedroom, and lay awake, listening to the sound of Ethan's snoring emanating from down the hall, as he presumably continued his journey of self-discovery. The following day at the shop, my crew noted my subdued demeanor, but they wisely refrained from probing. They were accustomed to my periods of intense, silent concentration. I dedicated the morning to sanding a fuel tank, the rhythmic back-and-forth motion allowing my mind the necessary space to strategize my subsequent actions. I required an external perspective, someone removed from this tangled web of deception, someone who wouldn't advise me to talk it through or dismiss my concerns as an overreaction. I needed an impartial observer who would examine the objective facts and label them for what they undeniably were. During my lunch break, I wiped my hands on a greasy rag and retrieved my phone. I scrolled past the contacts for my family members and old acquaintances with whom I'd lost touch months ago, finally stopping at the name of the one individual I knew would respond without hesitation: Ali. We had initially crossed paths a decade earlier in a night class neither of us was particularly enthusiastic about attending. He had been pursuing engineering while simultaneously working warehouse shifts. I, meanwhile, was diligently completing business management courses after enduring 12-hour days in other people's garages. We forged a bond over the shared distinction of being the only two students who consistently completed all the assigned homework. Over the ensuing years, he had evolved into my closest confidant, the person who celebrated the opening of my shop, the one who offered blunt, no-nonsense advice when I was acting foolishly, and the individual who, at my wedding, looked Ethan directly in the eye and declared, "If you ever hurt her, I will make your life a living hell." I hadn't yet divulged any details to him. My thumb hovered over his name for a brief moment before I initiated the call. He answered on the second ring. "Yo, Wrench Queen," he greeted me, employing a familiar nickname. "What's happening?" My throat constricted unexpectedly at the sound of his voice. "I need to talk," I managed, my tone sounding flatter than intended. "In person?" He fell silent momentarily. "Is it bad?" he inquired. "Yes," I confirmed, "considerably bad." "Okay," he replied. "I'll bring food." A strangled laugh nearly escaped me. "Allie, I don't—" "Too late," he interrupted. "I've already made up my mind. Text me when Ethan's out of the house. I'll raid your garage like the old days." After I concluded the call, the world seemed to regain a sliver of its equilibrium. Ethan genuinely believed he was orchestrating a conscious transition into his next great romantic saga. He remained oblivious to the fact that I possessed a friend who specialized in dismantling self-deceptions with brutal efficiency, often accompanied by a generous serving of garlic sauce. That evening, Ethan retired to bed early, citing the necessity of rest for an upcoming breathwork circle the following morning. I watched him close the door behind him, then sent Allie a concise text message. "Coast is clear." His reply arrived instantaneously. "On my way. Bring an appetite and a war plan." Ali arrived approximately 25 minutes later in his ancient Honda Civic, a vehicle distinguished by its mismatched doors and a bumper held together by a combination of sheer willpower and zip ties. I heard its characteristic rattle echoing down my street before it even rounded the corner. He emerged from the car, carrying 2 substantial takeout bags in one hand and a 6-pack of beer in the other. "Emergency provisions," he announced, stepping into my garage. "I wasn't sure if you'd require sustenance, carbohydrates, or a stiff drink, so I brought the trifecta." I didn't immediately smile, but the moment the inviting aroma of garlic and grilled chicken reached my senses, a slight loosening occurred in my chest, creating just enough space for a single, genuine smile. He placed the bags on the workbench and surveyed the workshop, his gaze seemingly searching for any physical evidence of distress on the floor. "All right, Sienna," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "Start talking." I didn't soften the blow. There was no point. I recounted every detail. Ethan's ultimatum, his pronouncements regarding monogamy as a social construct, Sasha's reemergence into his supposed spiritual journey, the clandestine calendar entries at her loft, the incriminating text messages, the revealing voice memos, and the assertion that he hadn't experienced happiness for years. By the time I reached the revelation that Toby was also involved with Sasha, Allie had completely ceased eating, a clear indication that I had reached the precipice of human incredulity, even for him. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. Then, with meticulous care, he set down his shawarma. "I'm going to ask you a single question," he stated, his gaze unwavering, "and I need you to answer with absolute honesty. Are you—" He paused, his voice dropping slightly. "In any conceivable scenario, considering remaining with this man?" "No," I replied unequivocally. Allie exhaled audibly, as if he'd been holding his breath for the past 10 minutes. "Thank God," he exclaimed, "because if you had said yes, Sienna, I would have physically placed you in the trunk of my car and driven you directly to a therapist." A sharp, weary laugh escaped me. He grinned, encouraged by my reaction. "So, what's the strategy?" he inquired, cracking open a bottle. "Because you've amassed enough evidence to obliterate him from the map of Oregon." "I don't want to act rashly," I responded. "I intend to be strategic, precise." Allie nodded in approval. "Excellent. Revenge is a dish best served with sound legal counsel." A flicker of recollection stirred within me. "Hold on a moment," I stated deliberately. We formalized a prenuptial agreement. Allie's eyebrows shot upwards in disbelief. Wait, what? I stood and moved towards the house, with him following, still occupied with his meal. We proceeded to the spare room, our office, cluttered with years of accumulated paperwork and boxes I'd intended to sort for what felt like an eternity. I yanked open the filing cabinet and extracted a folder labeled Important Documents. And there it was, the prenuptial contract, 15 pages in length, duly signed and notarized. Allie pulled a chair closer and settled beside me as I spread the documents across the desk. Why would he want a prenup? Allie inquired. His parents, I explained. They wanted to safeguard his inheritance, funds bequeathed by his grandparents. So, essentially, they didn't have faith in you. Precisely, Allie confirmed, shaking his head. And now you're on the cusp of transforming that lack of trust into an astonishing plot development. I handed him the pages while I scanned the initial sections: separate property, inheritance, protections, shared debt responsibility. Then, midway down page 8, my gaze locked. Allie, I whispered, read this. He leaned in, and his eyebrows ascended to his forehead. Oh, my word. The stipulation was articulated with unvarnished clarity. Infidelity clause. In the event that either party engages in extramarital relations during the course of the marriage, the faithful party shall retain full ownership of the primary residence, all jointly acquired vehicles, and all marital assets accumulated during the union. The unfaithful party forfeits all claims to said assets and shall bear responsibility for their own legal expenses. Allie looked at me as if I'd just announced he'd won a fortune. Sienna, he breathed, reverence in his tone. He's trapped, I murmured, swallowing. He has no recollection of this, I'm certain. He hasn't alluded to it even once. Allie's grin widened, a slow, wicked curve. That only makes it better. He rose and began to pace, his demeanor suggesting he was strategizing a complex operation. All right, he declared. Here's the plan. First thing tomorrow, you're contacting a divorce attorney. You present this prenup to them along with your extensive collection of evidence and let the legal machinery commence. I exhaled slowly. For the first time in days, perhaps weeks, the mental fog began to dissipate. And Sasha? I asked. Allie smirked. You want her to experience this too, don't you? Because individuals like her rarely desist unless they're forced to face consequences. In a figurative sense, of course. She has a boyfriend, I stated. A long-term one, Harris. He likely has no clue. Allie threw his hands up. Perfect. You have a moral imperative to inform the poor fellow. I'm not aiming to dismantle lives, I protested. Sienna, Allie placed a hand on my shoulder. Ethan and Sasha have already compromised their own lives. You're merely illuminating the situation. He wasn't mistaken. We spent another hour meticulously dissecting the prenup page by page, clarifying every implication. So, the house is mine. The savings are mine. The boutique I established during our marriage is protected. The legal costs for the divorce? His burden. His attempt to step into Sasha's life and embrace a new existence of freedom while retaining the comforts of the life I helped build? Not going to happen. Allie reclined in his chair, hands clasped behind his head. Sienna, this is the cinematic moment where the soundtrack shifts and the audience erupts in applause. I shook my head, feeling drained and overwhelmed. Allie, this is utterly preposterous. I never desired any of this. Of course you didn't, he replied softly, but you're navigating it with the poise of a queen. That unexpected compliment caught me off guard. He grabbed another shawarma, tore it open, and gestured towards me with it. So, here's your mission briefing, Agent Ward. I rolled my eyes but allowed him to continue. Step 1, lawyer tomorrow, no delays. Step 2, continue accumulating evidence. Document everything. Step 3, allow Ethan to engineer his own downfall. The deeper he delves, the cleaner the separation. Step 4, When he's at his little sanctuary with Sasha, you serve him the papers. Step 5. Revel in the spectacle as his world crumbles. I gazed back at the prenup. I recalled the day we signed it, Ethan kissing my forehead and expressing gratitude for my understanding, his parents appearing relieved as if I had passed some crucial examination. And now, that examination was poised to cost him every ounce of advantage he believed he possessed. Allie gathered the food wrappers and patted the folder. "We're meeting again after your lawyer's appointment," he announced. "Same time, same garage. I'll bring more shawarma and a victory playlist." He paused at the doorway. "And Sienna, you are not alone. Not for a single second." His words resonated more deeply than I anticipated. After he departed, I stood in the silent garage, surrounded by metal, grease, and the ambient warmth of machinery. I grasped the situation more clearly than I had understood my own marriage. I returned the prenup to its folder, placed the folder into a locked drawer, and pocketed the key. Then I whispered to the empty room, "You presented me with 2 options, Ethan. Here is mine." The following morning, I awoke before my alarm. Not due to rest, as God knows I hadn't had any, but because my mind was already operating at full speed. There's a distinct clarity that descends after someone has fundamentally disrupted your world. It's the peculiar calm that follows an explosion when the smoke still hangs in the air and you're simply assessing the devastation. I brewed coffee but couldn't taste it. I fed the shop dog, barely registering the action. By 8:05 a.m., I stood outside the offices of Clean, Weaver, and Hunt, family law specialists clutching the prenup folder so tightly its edges were beginning to bend. Inside, the air was perfumed with leather, citrus cleaner, and money. A receptionist escorted me to a private office where a man in his 50s sat behind a desk crafted from some smugly expensive wood. He wore thin-framed glasses and a perfectly tailored suit, but his eyes were sharp, yet kind. "You must be Sienna," he said, rising to shake my hand. "I'm David Clean. Please, have a seat." I sat, the chair sinking luxuriously beneath me. I felt as if I might drown in its softness. He clasped his hands, elbows resting on the desk. "Now, how can I assist you?" I didn't hesitate. "I need a divorce," I stated. His expression remained unchanged, but his posture seemed to sharpen subtly. "Very well. Let's begin at the beginning." I recounted the entire saga. Ethan's 2 choices, Sasha, the emotional entanglement, the calendar entries, the voice recordings, Toby's involvement, Ethan's retreat, his spiritual rhetoric, everything. Clean listened intently, his pen moving methodically across a legal pad. When I concluded, he leaned back. "Well," he remarked, "you've accomplished half my work for me." He gestured towards the folder. "And that," I slid it across the desk. "The prenup we signed 4 years ago," I explained, "and the infidelity clause on page 8. He skimmed the initial paragraphs, nodding occasionally. Then he reached page 8, the clause itself, and paused. "Ah," he murmured, "this certainly alters the landscape." He reread it slowly, his lips moving silently. He then closed the folder and set it aside as if it were a volatile device. "All right, Sienna, let's assess your position." He held up one finger. 1. You possess substantial documentation of Ethan's infidelity. Text messages, calendar entries, location data, voice recordings, all admissible. Second finger. 2. The prenup explicitly stipulates that the faithful spouse retains the primary residence, jointly acquired vehicles, and all marital assets accumulated during the marriage. Third finger. 3. The unfaithful spouse, Ethan, is obligated to cover his own legal fees. Fourth finger. 4. There's a substantial likelihood he has absolutely no awareness of this clause or its implications. I exhaled slowly. Correct. Cleany offered a smile, but it lacked warmth. It was the expression of a man who had witnessed countless divorces and recognized a surefire win when he saw it. "Ms. Ward," he said, "you are in an exceptionally advantageous legal standing." I swallowed. So, what do we do? We proceed deliberately, he advised. Allow Ethan to deepen his entanglement. You let him go on this retreat with Sasha? Is that correct? Yes. Excellent. Let him believe everything is unfolding precisely as he anticipates. In the meantime, I will prepare the divorce petition, attach the prenup, incorporate the evidence, and have everything ready for filing by Monday. He steepled his fingers thoughtfully. Once he's served, his attorney will likely attempt to negotiate. They invariably do, but upon reviewing the clause, most will advise their client to accept the terms, so it shouldn't prolong the process. In Oregon, there's a mandatory waiting period, but with an uncontested prenup, 2 to 3 months at the absolute maximum. A profound wave of gratitude washed over me, so potent I had to avert my gaze. "Thank you," I whispered. He softened. "I understand this is difficult, but you're handling it with remarkable fortitude." I let out a hollow laugh. "It doesn't feel like it." "Rarely does." He slid his business card across the desk. "Now, you go home, maintain normalcy, and contact me the moment Ethan departs." I nodded, stood, shook his hand, and walked out, my legs feeling inexplicably buoyant. Outside, the wind carried the scent of autumn and damp pavement. For the first time since Ethan's pronouncement in the kitchen, the air felt breathable. At 11:30 a.m., I parked in front of a modest cafe in the Alphabet District. I'd selected it because it offered sufficient public visibility to maintain civility, yet was quiet enough to prevent conversations from being overheard. I didn't have to wait long. A man entered, tall, with neatly trimmed dark hair, clad in a brown jacket and jeans. He projected an aura of someone who enjoyed tracking weather patterns, was a volunteer, and possessed a steady disposition. The type of man you'd entrust with your plants during an absence. Harris. He surveyed the room, his gaze alighting on me. I raised a hand. He approached slowly, his demeanor cautious. "You're Sienna?" he asked. "Yes." I nodded towards the empty seat opposite me. "Thank you for coming." He sat, his hands clasped tightly. "Your message indicated it was about Sasha." There was a moment of hesitation on my part, not out of a desire to shield Sasha, but because I understood the impact this revelation would have on him. He appeared to genuinely care for her. I opened my bag and withdrew a folder I had prepared. "Before I show you anything," I said quietly, "I want you to know I'm not here to cause you pain. I'm not seeking retribution. You deserve the truth, nothing more." He swallowed and nodded once. I slid the folder towards him. He opened it. A silent minute passed, then another. His shoulders gradually slumped forward as he reviewed the texts, the calendar entries, the screenshots, a transcript of one of the voice recordings. When he finally looked up, his eyes were clouded, not with tears, but with incredulity. "How long?" he whispered. "Has this been occurring?" 4 months, I replied. "At the very least." He closed the folder. "Thank you," he said softly. I wouldn't have known. She's been discussing moving in together next spring. We just took a trip to Bend 2 weeks ago." There it was, the devastating blow of betrayal. I recognized it instantly. "I'm so sorry," I said. "You don't deserve this." He let out a bitter laugh. "How ironic. Last month she kept mentioning how much she admired your marriage, said, 'You and Ethan communicate so well.'" My stomach churned. He stood, inhaled deeply, steeling himself. "I'm ending it today," he declared, "and I'm informing everyone in her holistic coaching group about her true nature." I nodded firmly once. He tucked the folder under his arm. "I hope," he said, "your husband receives everything he deserves." "Oh," I murmured, "he will." Upon my return home, Allie was waiting in the driveway, leaning against his Civic as if we were posing for a music video. "I have updates," he announced solemnly, waving his phone. "Do I or do I not serve as your emotional support gremlin?" "What have you been doing?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "Nothing illegal," he replied too quickly. "Mostly." "Allie, look," he said, holding up both hands. "You're orchestrating the legal strike. I'm handling the psychological warfare." He displayed his screen. First, a 1-star Google review for Sasha and Ethan's Conscious Living Workshop. Attended their awakening session. Mostly recycled Pinterest quotes and strange vibes. No refunds offered. Kombucha was acceptable. Second, he had enrolled Ethan in approximately 1 million spam email lists. Third, he had created 12 fake profiles and registered them for Sasha's upcoming $900 retreat, thereby preventing genuine clients from signing up. "She's going to confirm all these individuals," Allie said proudly. "Send them materials and then none of them will show up." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Allie, you're welcome." I sighed. "Fine, but absolutely no felonies." "No promises." That night, Ethan returned home brimming with enthusiasm. "Our retreat is this weekend," he announced, his smile barely contained. "Sasha says it's going to be a transformative experience." I truly believe this marks the beginning of a new chapter for both of us. I nodded and forced my lips into a semblance of encouragement. "That's wonderful," I said. "You're surprisingly calm," he observed. Internally, I was already mentally packing his belongings. "I'm working on expanding," I said lightly. He smiled proudly, like a teacher whose student had finally grasped the lesson. If only he knew. Friday evening, he packed his bag yoga mats, organic snacks, several linen shirts, and kissed my cheek on his way out. "Thank you for being so understanding," he said. "When I return, we can discuss what this means for our relationship." "Of course," I replied. He walked to his car with the air of someone embarking on a spiritual journey. I watched him drive away, waited until his taillights vanished, then retrieved my phone. "The coast is clear." Ellie's response appeared 3 seconds later. "Operation Clean Sweep, engage." The instant Ethan's car disappeared down the street, linen shirts, yoga mat, and delusion neatly stowed in the trunk, I felt something within me unlock. A quiet, decisive click, akin to disengaging the safety on a tool you've been anticipating using. Allie arrived 5 minutes later, blasting Arabic pop music from his Civic as if we were about to execute a heist, which, frankly, we sort of were. He marched inside carrying his laptop, a toolkit, and a plastic bag filled with energy drinks. "First order of business," he declared, tossing me a can. "Hydrate, warriors, hydrate." "Allie," I sighed. "We're not at war." He cracked open his drink. "You hired a divorce lawyer, you're deploying legal ordnance, and I've signed Ethan up for 17 spam mailing lists in the last 20 minutes. Yes, we are." I couldn't dispute that point. Changing the locks. We began with the front door, not because I intended to bar Ethan from entry. That wasn't the objective. This wasn't about theatrics. It was about symbolism, establishing boundaries, achieving closure, and, all right, perhaps a minuscule amount of psychological leverage. Allie handed me a screwdriver. "You have the honors." It took 5 minutes. When the new lock clicked into place, it felt as though something within my chest had also clicked. A new key, a new entryway, a fresh start. Allie stepped back, admiring our handiwork. "Step 1, he announced. "Completed. Step 2. Packing his belongings, not discarding, not trashing, not incinerating in a ritualistic circle, though Allie enthusiastically proposed the latter. Simply packing. Neatly, methodically, clinically. His clothes went into 2 suitcases, his toiletries into a box, his stacks of pseudo-spiritual literature, surrendering to the universe, radical authenticity, become the flame you seek, were placed in their own labeled container. Allie picked one up. "Do you think these are tax-deductible if your business is scamming desperate individuals?" "Allie," I admonished. "Right, right? Less judgment, more packing." By the time we finished, the guest room resembled a departure lounge. Everything of his was stacked and categorized. Nothing damaged, nothing petty, just prepared for transit. Allie dusted his hands dramatically. "Step 2 complete. What's next, General Ward?" I laughed despite myself. "You need therapy. Absolutely, he agreed. But not today. 3. Reclaiming the house. This part stung more than I anticipated. Taking down wedding photographs, removing couple-centric artwork, peeling off the vinyl decal from our bedroom wall that read, "Love builds us." A phrase Ethan had once insisted resonated deeply with him when we moved in. Allie surveyed the room, his brow furrowed sympathetically. "Are you all right?" "Yes," I replied. "It's just strange to erase someone." "You're not erasing him," Allie stated. "You're restoring the original paint job." That remark should have sounded trite, but it didn't. We spent 2 hours rearranging the living room, repositioning the sofa, swapping out framed pictures, and displaying some of my own artwork, old charcoal sketches I had stored in a closet because Ethan had once declared they felt excessively intense. I stepped back. It felt like my home again, not ours. Mine. 4. The legal detonation. Kleena called that afternoon. "Everything is filed," he reported. "The documentation is prepared for service. Would you prefer to deliver it yourself upon his return, or shall I arrange formal delivery?" "I'll give it to him," I said. "I want him to see precisely who made this decision." "Very well. Everything is in order." I hung up and gazed at the envelope on the counter. The divorce petition, the prenup, the evidence index. Somewhere in the Cascade Mountains, Ethan was likely meditating by a lake, informing Sasha how liberated he finally felt. Meanwhile, his future was contained within a plain manila envelope resting beside my toaster. 5. Allie's petty retaliation, he continued. As I set the envelope down, Allie emerged from the dining room with his laptop, appearing far too pleased with himself. "Update," he announced. "We have movement." "Allie," I cautioned. "Hear me out," he insisted, spinning the laptop towards me. On Sasha's retreat event page, 12 new sign-ups had appeared, each one associated with one of Allie's fabricated email addresses. "She's sending out confirmation packets," he declared gleefully, "including dietary restrictions and liability waivers, and she has absolutely no idea those individuals don't exist. Allie, let me have this moment." He clicked another tab. "And look at this. Someone has already marked my review of their coaching practice as helpful." I gave him a look. "Allie, okay. I'll exercise a modicum of restraint." He placed the laptop down and crossed his arms. "Seriously, Sienna, I'm proud of you." That silenced me. He wasn't joking, not this time. "You're handling this with more grace than anyone I know," he continued. "You didn't scream. You didn't break anything. You didn't burn his clothes in a ceremonial cleansing of the spiritually misguided. You planned, you documented, you protected yourself." My throat tightened. "You deserve far better than someone who uses energy alignment as a pretext for infidelity." I nodded, swallowing hard. "I know," I whispered. 6. Harris's retribution. That evening, my phone buzzed. "Harris. Just ended things," the text read. She attempted to gaslight me. Then I posted everything in her alumni coaching group. "Just thought you should know." I stared at the message. Allie peeked over my shoulder. "Oh, hell yes, the dominoes are falling." 7. The eve of the storm. Sunday night. My phone pinged again. "Ethan, this weekend has been incredible, life-changing. I feel like I'm stepping into my authentic self. Hope you're doing okay." I stared at the words. Not angry, not hurt, simply finished. I sent back a thumbs-up emoji. Allie burst into laughter. "Savage," I smiled. It's the only response I owe him. 8. The return. Monday evening. Ethan's car appeared in the driveway. He entered the house humming, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, emanating the scent of sage and overpriced eucalyptus oil. I stood in the living room. He froze when he noticed the missing photographs, the rearranged furniture, the boxed-up possessions. "Sienna, what's happening?" "The kitchen," I said softly. "There's something for you." He walked in slowly and confusedly, as if approaching a wild creature. He picked up the envelope and opened it. He read the title page, his face draining of all color. "Sienna," he whispered. "What is this?" "The papers," I stated, "and the prenup you conveniently forgot you signed." He shuffled backward, his eyes wide, pages trembling in his hands. This can't be real. This is absurd. You can't be serious." "I am serious," I replied calmly. "We can salvage this. We're finished. Sienna, please." I raised a hand. He stopped as if I had activated a mute button. "This isn't sudden," I said quietly. "You departed months ago. You simply lack the integrity to acknowledge it." He attempted to speak, but no words emerged. I walked past him and headed upstairs. At the foot of the staircase, I paused. "Oh," I added, "and Ethan?" He looked up, his eyes filled with desperation. "You wanted to explore," I said. "Congratulations, you're free." I retreated to my bedroom, closing the door behind me, and for the first time in ages, a deep, restorative sleep claimed me. Ethan didn't immediately depart. He spent the night ensconced on the living room floor, the prenuptial agreement clutched in his hand as if prolonged scrutiny might magically alter its terms. I could hear him pacing at 3 o'clock in the morning, his voice a low murmur, his breathing shallow with panic. When I descended for my morning coffee at 6:30, he remained in the same posture. He appeared diminished, not enlightened or awakened, simply a man whose quest for spiritual revelation had collided headfirst with the unyielding reality of consequences. He rose as I entered. "Sienna, please," he began, his voice strained. "We don't have to go through with this." "We already are," I responded, pouring my coffee. "You're not thinking rationally. Your actions are driven by fear." "No," I countered, turning to face him. "For the first time in months, my thoughts are perfectly clear." He opened his mouth again, but I bypassed him, heading out to work. I threw myself into a custom build, focusing on the tangible reality of metal before me, a stark contrast to the flimsy facade he had proven to be. Then came the lawyer's panic and the single phone call I deliberately ignored. By Wednesday, Klein contacted me for an update. "He's secured legal counsel," Klein informed me. "A Mr. Rothman. He's aiming for a settlement." "A settlement on what?" I inquired. Klein emitted a soft chuckle. "Primarily the infidelity clause. He contends it's excessively punitive." "Is it legally sound?" I pressed. "Absolutely," Klein affirmed. "His lawyer is fully aware of its enforceability. He's merely engaging in a performance of hope." "Let him perform," I replied. Klein's tone shifted to one of caution. "Prepare yourself, Sienna. He and his family may attempt to exert pressure." Unsurprisingly, I didn't have to wait long. That same afternoon, Ethan's mother, Marilyn, called me twice. Her first voicemail: "Sienna, darling, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Ethan is utterly heartbroken. Please call me." Her second voicemail: "We believe marriage is founded on communication and forgiveness. You cannot simply discard it." It was amusing, her sudden espousal of these principles, considering she hadn't uttered them when they thrust the prenup before me 4 years prior. I did not return her calls. On Thursday, Ethan's father, Peter, attempted contact, his call going directly to voicemail. Friday morning, I received a text message from an unexpected source. "Toby, we should talk. Family gathering tomorrow, 2 p.m., Mom's house. Be there." Just like that. No apology, no remorse, no mention of his entanglement with his brother's former partner, which he had framed as personal growth. I stared at the screen. Allie noticed my consternated expression when we met for lunch. "Absolutely not," he declared, his mouth full of food. "That's a trap, like a spiritual intervention, but incredibly foolish." "I'm going," I stated calmly. He nearly choked on his lunch. "I'm sorry, did you say—" "I want them to hear my perspective, and then I intend to walk out." Allie regarded me with an intensity that suggested he was contemplating physical restraint. "Fine," he relented after a moment, "but if they start chanting, I'm calling the authorities." So I was heading to the house where denial reigned supreme. On Saturday, I drove to Marilyn and Peter's residence, a nondescript white 2-story suburban dwelling with a meticulously maintained lawn and a seldom-used porch swing. I rang the doorbell. Marilyn opened the door, her eyes red-rimmed but her bearing rigid, as if determined to cultivate an air of offense. "Sienna," she greeted me with a brittle warmth. "Please, come in." I stepped across the threshold. The living room was occupied. Peter occupied his recliner, arms crossed. Toby sat on the sofa, his gaze averted from me, while Ethan sat beside him, looking pale and apprehensive, like a child bracing for chastisement. Marilyn gestured towards the sole unoccupied seat, positioned directly before them, reminiscent of an interrogation setup. I sat. Peter cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming, Sienna," he said. "We simply wish to comprehend the situation. From Ethan's account, this appears rather sudden." "Sudden," I echoed. 3 months of deception, emotional infidelity, calendar entries marked personal development, voice memos, spiritual manipulation. But yes, by all means, sudden. Marilyn leaned forward. "Marriage requires effort, dear. One cannot simply disengage the moment challenges arise." I suppressed a laugh. Toby scoffed. "She's always been so rigid," he muttered. "You never embraced anything beyond the conventional." I met his gaze, finding it ironic that he, the one who had been blissfully cohabiting with Sasha behind Ethan's back while championing the concept of non-possessiveness, would accuse me of rigidity. I took a deep breath. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. They blinked in surprise. I retrieved my phone, opened my notes app, and began to read. Verbatim. "You can accept that I wish to explore something with Sasha, or you can stay out of my way while I do so." Their expressions underwent a visible shift. Marilyn gasped. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it abruptly. I continued. "Sasha and I share a connection you could never comprehend. I owe you no obligation of monogamy. That is a societal construct." Marilyn pressed a hand to her chest. Peter mumbled, "Ethan, what?" I did not pause. I scrolled down and read the calendar entries detailing weekly personal development sessions at Sasha's loft, the text messages discussing transcending outdated relationship paradigms. Then I played the voice memo, where Ethan confided in Sasha that he hadn't been happy for years. The room fell silent. Then I played the second memo, the one featuring Toby. Toby jolted upright. "Sienna, don't!" But it was too late. Their voices reverberated through the room. "So does she know I'm seeing Sasha too?" "What are you talking about?" "You said no ownership. Plenty of love to go around. Shared growth." Marilyn's face drained of color, becoming chalk white. Peter's jaw dropped. Ethan buried his face in his hands. Toby scrambled to his feet, stammering, "That's taken out of context." "Is there context?" I inquired. "Is it the part where you both assumed I was too timid to take any action?" He offered no reply. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. "Just to clarify," I stated, "your son spent months orchestrating an affair with his ex-partner. Your other son actively participated. Both of them lied. Both of them manipulated. Both of them believed I would simply stand by and undergo personal evolution while they rewrote their lives without my involvement." Peter opened his mouth, then closed it, rubbing his face. Marilyn whispered, I didn't know." "No," I corrected him. "You chose not to know." I stood. "We signed a prenup," I said calmly. "The one Ethan insisted upon. You all recall that, correct?" Their eyes widened. "It includes an infidelity clause," I continued, "which he violated repeatedly." Ethan looked up then, his face contorted with shock and apprehension. "Sienna, please." "No," I declared. "You forfeit the right to beg for the life you so carelessly discarded." I turned towards the door. As I reached for the handle, I delivered my final pronouncement. "You presented me with 2 options, Ethan. Either condone your affair or step aside while you pursued it. So I selected a third path, and I left. Behind me, a cacophony erupted. Marilyn's sobs, Peter's indignant demands for explanations, Toby's futile attempts to rationalize the indefensible, and Ethan's desperate pleas for forgiveness he hadn't earned. I did not look back, not even once. 3. The clean severance. The divorce was finalized in September, just shy of 4 months, precisely as Klein had predicted. Ethan offered no resistance. He couldn't. The prenup, the incriminating evidence, the voice memos, they had him cornered so effectively that Rothman ultimately advised him to accept an amicable settlement. I retained the house, the savings, and our joint assets, while my business remained secure. Ethan relocated to a compact one-bedroom apartment in the downtown core, which incurred an exorbitant rent and was plagued by a boisterous neighbor whose taste in music, specifically EDM at 2 a.m, was questionable. Karma, it seems, possesses a distinct personality at times. 4. Sasha's downfall. Harris honored his commitment. He exposed Sasha's entire coaching enterprise within her client network. It transpired that numerous clients harbored their own unsettling narratives: financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, spiritual coercion. Refunds were demanded, glowing testimonials vanished, retreats were canceled, and her business dissolved by midsummer. According to her Instagram feed, she relocated to Colorado and began posting cryptic pronouncements about rejuvenation following ego death, whatever that enigmatic phrase signified. 5. A fresh start. By October, my workshop was experiencing unprecedented demand. I employed an additional mechanic, repainted the reception area, and adopted a stray cat that wandered in one day and refused to depart, naming her Torque. Allie, predictably, recounted the entire saga at social gatherings as if it were a comedic monologue. Ethan had become a cautionary tale, a punchline. I was content with that. Life progressed, steady, tranquil, and serene, until one evening when everything nearly unraveled once more. That October evening had draped Portland in its characteristic gentle rain, imbuing the air with the mingled scents of pine and damp asphalt. I had just closed the workshop for the week, and Allie was over, feet propped casually on my coffee table, controller in hand, providing a running commentary on our video game as if auditioning for a sports broadcasting gig. Torque, the cat, slumbered on his lap, shedding enough fur to fashion a modest sweater. "Did you seriously just pilot your motorcycle off a cliff?" Allie inquired as my in-game avatar ragdolled into pixelated oblivion. "It was a strategic maneuver," I stated. "Tactically idiotic," he retorted with a snort. It was one of those evenings that felt effortlessly normal, the kind where the world seemed devoid of any impending detonations. Until a thunderous pounding erupted on my front door. Not a polite knock, but a violent assault. Allie paused the game mid-respawn. "Expecting anyone?" he asked. "No." The pounding intensified. Then a slurred voice, steady and unmistakably Ethan's, cut through the air. "Sienna, I know you're in there." My stomach plummeted. Allie raised an eyebrow. "Oh, this promises to be entertaining." I rose, my heart beating with a steady rhythm, devoid of fear or anxiety, merely a readiness for what was to come. I opened the door, and there he stood, Ethan. If his earlier spiritual awakening had lent him a certain radiance, it was now extinguished, snuffed out like a candle, drowned in cheap whiskey. He was clad in sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, his hair disheveled, his eyes bloodshot and glassy. An empty bottle of something expensive dangled loosely from his fingertips. "Sienna," he said, stumbling forward unsteadily, "we need to talk." "No," I countered, blocking the doorway. "We don't." "Yes, we do," he insisted, his voice gaining a desperate edge. "You ruined my life." "Technically," Allie interjected from behind me, his voice laced with amusement, "you ruined your own life. She merely chronicled it." Ethan blinked at him, bewildered. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm Allie," he responded cheerfully, "Sienna's best friend in this particular narrative arc. In the original timeline, I was Riley's confidant. In this rewritten version, I embody the spirit of chaos, guiding Sienna through her villainous transformation. Torque meowed from within the house, perfectly timed. Ethan swayed. "You know nothing." Allie crossed his arms. "I know you forgot about the prenup you signed. You subsist on kombucha and delusion, and you're currently inebriated on her porch, 4 months after she divorced you. That's sufficient knowledge." Ethan turned back to me, his outrage morphing into something more vulnerable. "I made a mistake," he admitted, his voice cracking. I was confused. Sasha manipulated me. Toby lied. I wasn't thinking clearly. "You were thinking perfectly clearly," I stated. "You just didn't believe I would ever intervene." He took a step closer. I remained unmoving. "We could have worked through this," he whispered, "if you had granted me time." "You presented me with 2 choices," I said softly. "Witness your infidelity or step aside while you pursued it. You never offered a third option, but I discovered one." He shook his head in desperation. "See, please, I'll do anything. Just give me another chance." Allie dramatically produced his phone. "Shall I replay the voice memos?" he inquired. "I have backups stored in 4 separate locations." Ethan glared at him. "Shut up." Allie smiled. "Can't. It's a medical condition." Ethan turned back to me, tears now streaming down his face. "I have nowhere to go," he whispered. "My friends won't speak to me. My parents are weary of me. Toby isn't answering my calls. Sasha left the state. His voice broke. "You moved on as if I never mattered." The words landed, but not with the impact he intended. I stepped outside, gently closing the door behind me. The rain had begun to fall, a soft, misty drizzle. He stood there, shivering, clutching the empty bottle as if it were a lifeline. "I'm not asking for anything unreasonable," he pleaded. I need someone. I need you." I shook my head. "You don't miss me," I explained. "You miss stability. You miss security. You miss the person who managed the responsibilities you were too disorganized, too selfish, too fearful to handle yourself." He opened his mouth, then closed it. "The truth is," I continued, "you're not regretful for your actions. You're regretful that it didn't unfold as you'd planned. You're regretful that your spiritual experiment imploded, and you're regretful that Sasha departed before you could transition into her life." He squeezed his eyes shut. I took a step back. "Ethan, go home." He remained rooted to the spot, the rain gathering in his hair. "Please," he whispered, "I'm begging you." "No," I said gently, for I had already prioritized myself. Allie cracked open the door. "Hey," he stage whispered loudly, "your parents are here." Sure enough, headlights illuminated the driveway as a car pulled up. Marilyn emerged looking frantic. "Ethan," she cried. "Oh, thank goodness, Sienna. I'm so terribly sorry." He made no move to resist as she grabbed his arm. He was limp, defeated, utterly broken in a way I could not mend, even if I had desired to. Marilyn lifted her face towards me. "I am sorry for everything," she whispered. "Truly." I nodded but remained silent. She guided Ethan into the passenger seat and drove away. Their taillights vanished into the rain. Allie closed the door behind them. "Brother," he declared, collapsing dramatically onto my sofa. "That was the most pathetic display I have ever witnessed." I laughed, a genuine, unburdened laugh. For the first time in a long while, it wasn't tinged with exhaustion or heartbreak. It felt clean, light. Allie unpaused the game. Torque stretched across his lap, assuming ownership. Life continued its forward momentum. And Ethan, he became precisely what he should have always been.